Welcome everyone. We are going to start with a quick video with some fun negotiation scenes as we wait for folks to hop onto the webinar. So enjoy your viewing pleasure for a few minutes.
Telling the truth is not in the cards right now. I thought you'd be excited to have an acting job.
If it's an acting job, we should get paid.
Yeah, you're gonna get paid in experience.
I want to actually get paid.
All right, what do you want?
$600 for the day, plus overtime if we go over 8 hours. I'll do my own hair and makeup, and I want you to pay for the 6-week intensive acting camp that my mom can't afford.
$50 for the day and a 2-week acting class at the YMCA nearest you.
$500 and a 4-week acting class.
$300 and a 3-week class.
Done.
I would have done it for $500.
I would have done it for the experience.
House together that we're gonna flip, and I have to say it has been going great.
We make an amazing team.
Yeah, the key is trust.
Absolutely. The key is I let Claire think she's in charge. I hide what I want in something bigger and more expensive. Then when she rejects that, we compromise on what I wanted all along. I call my method the Trojan horse. You know how I got Lily? I asked Mitchell for triplets. Okay, you are going to love what I found for the kitchen countertops. It's from Carrara, Italy.
Oh.
It's where Michelangelo got the marble to make the David.
Oh, now we know why the David couldn't afford any clothes.
Okay, well, I also found this one. It's not as nice, but it's less expensive.
Well, it's still over budget, but I guess it's okay.
Well, I am sorry, but $18.5 a piece is the best offer that I could make.
Well, I understand. And there are some great-looking vans you got out there.
Yes, sir. Top of the line.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your time, Mr.
Denham. Billy Tim Denham.
Yes, Denham like a jean.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah.
Just like the G.
Man, you got some lovely hands here. Do you moisturize?
I'm sorry?
I tried all sorts of brand of lotion. I even went fragrance-free for a whole year. Now, my sister, she uses aloe vera with a little sunscreen in it. Yes. And ideally speaking, we all should wear gloves to go to bed. But I found out that would be a little interference in my social agenda, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Plus, I get a reaction from the camphor. So I really don't get into the traditional remedies, you know.
I see, yeah. Let me tell you something. If you were willing to pay cash,
Yeah.
I might be able to drop that down to, say, $7.16 each.
No,
Yes, sir.
you do that.
Well, yes, sir.
Man, that'd be lovely. They told me to come see you.
Oh, did they? Well, I'm sure glad they did.
That's what they told me.
Okay, well, let me go get the paperwork, and I'll be right back. You just wait here at the table, okay?
You do that.
Thank you, sir.
Jerry, I have a family to support. Hear me? I want to stay in Arizona. I want my new contract. But I like you. Yes, I like you, Jerry. My wife likes you. You're good to my wife. I will stay with you.
That's great. I'm very happy.
Are you listening?
Yes.
That's what I'm going to do for you. God bless you, Jerry. But this is what you're going to do for me. You listen? Jerry?
Yeah, what can I do for you, Rod? You just tell me, what can I do for you?
It's a very personal, very important thing. Hell, it's a family motto. Are you ready, Jerry?
I'm ready.
Just want to make sure you're ready, brother. Here it is. Show me the money.
Was looking good, but I think I'm taking too long.
Back
to the spot for a Glock. I took a long over floss, but still got a knock.
Money! Jerry, does that make you feel good just to say that? Say it with me one time, Jerry.
Show you the money.
Oh, no, you can do better than that, Jerry. I want you to say it with meaning, brother. Hey, I got Bonsu on the other line. I better hear you say it.
Yeah, no. Show you the money.
Not show you. Show me the money.
Show me the money.
Yeah. Louder.
Show me the money.
That's it, brother, but you got to yell that shit.
Show me the money.
I need to feel you, Jerry.
Show me the money.
Jerry, you better yell. Show me the money. Show me the money.
All right, now we'll move to our presentation. Thank you all for joining Legal Value Network's webinar, Negotiating Tactics for Work, Home, and Beyond. Today's session is brought to you by LVN's Beyond the Technical Programming track, which is one of 3 tracks LVN's webinar committee is focused on for the year. Our other 2 being pricing and LPM and innovation. If you are new to LVN, welcome to the growing community of more than 800 business of law professionals. We hope that in addition to today's session, you take time to check out our other content, such as the monthly newsletter, podcast, and recently published LPPM survey, or engage in upcoming roundtables, women's initiative forums, and LVN's annual conference set for October 6th through 8th. During our time today, please note, only video feed you're going to see is that of the presenters. Everyone will be on mute except for us, and we will record this session and it will be available on legalvaluenetwork.com soon after this event. Lastly, questions are encouraged, so please use the Q&A feature on Zoom toolbar to post your questions. For optimal viewing, also feel free to use Zoom's feature to go to speaker view and extend the divider bar to have more of the presenters shown instead of the PowerPoint. We hope the video has gotten everyone ready to talk about negotiating. Throughout our time today, we will be highlighting the key tactics of the book, Never Split the Difference. After reviewing the main takeaways from 3 to 4 chapters at a time, we'll look to our panelists to walk through how they use them in their professional and personal lives. LVN founding sponsor Iridium has also graciously offered to donate 5 copies of the book for us to raffle off to attendees. We will be doing a random drawing of those participating in the call today, and we'll follow up via email if you have won. Before we dive in, I thought I would share a quick note from the book to further get us in the mindset for today's discussion. Every moment in life is a series of conflicts that when managed can raise to creative beauty. Taking you on today's journey is a stellar lineup of professionals from all different industries, backgrounds, and geographies, therefore all having unique negotiation experiences. I'm Madison Toft, Senior Legal Project Manager at Perkins Coie, based in New York City. I negotiate millions of dollars in budgets and pricing arrangements, but clam up trying to sell things on Craigslist or convincing a cab to take me to Brooklyn.
Thank you, Madison. My name is Bonsu. I'm the pricing manager at Baker McKenzie. I too negotiate millions of dollars in budgets and pricing arrangements, but I seriously consider removing Netflix each time they try to raise their prices because I've been anchored into that $8 price. So if any of our panelists or viewers have an in with Netflix, just let them know there's somebody in the district who is brooding.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Jordan Brandt. I am a licensed professional counselor and I work for Frazier, which is the largest distributor of autism services in the state of Minnesota. I spend my days negotiating, typically with 3-year-olds, on who's going to get the red chair and trying to convince my husband that we should have pasta for the 5th night in a row.
How's it going, everyone? My name is Mutaba El Gouda. I'm an assistant manager of basketball operations and player engagement for the Golden State Warriors. On a day-to-day basis, I help negotiate player contracts as well as their endorsement deals off of the court. But I also struggle to navigate fair prices when I'm in New York City flea markets.
Hey everyone, my name is Michael Woods. I am an account manager for WeWork with over 850 locations worldwide based out of Minneapolis. I have been selling everything from cars to real estate, and I pride myself in negotiating and knowing what I want.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Well, thank you, Michael. And special thanks to all our panelists for taking time out of their busy schedules to share with us today. Your presence is truly a present. I think we're all in for a treat today. If you haven't read the book, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, it's a great and easy read. Alternatively, if you're more of a visual learner, he's got a ton of content that's circulating the web where you can get the essence of each lesson. And additionally, I would recommend his masterclass for those who want to delve a bit deeper. So without further ado, the nitty-gritty or the sports center version of this text is, as you can imagine, all things negotiation. The book is an amalgamation of decades of his experiences as an FBI international hostage negotiator and a teacher at top business schools. Personally, what I enjoyed most about this text is the real-life applications of these strategies. Admittedly, before reading the text, I thought due to his background, I assumed his teachings would be too esoteric for normal people to use. However, I was pleasantly surprised at his offering up practical strategies for everyday negotiations each of us encounters. So with that, we'll go to chapter 1, new rules. The key takeaway here from chapter 1 is that all people want to be understood and accepted. And listening is the cheapest yet most effective concession we all can make. I understood this to be the generic problem solution scenario, with the problem being a good number of people don't think that they're being heard when they speak, and thus the solution is simply just listen to our counterpart, and it's the path of least resistance where we can provide a necessary baseline for a productive exchange. For example, when a customer service representative uses an apology in a first name to create an atmosphere of warmth and interactions, i.e., Jordan, I'm so sorry you weren't able to receive your package in a timely manner, or Agyeman, please bear with me as we locate your package. I'm sure this example in the era of COVID is one that hits home for all of us, as our online shopping has ramped up significantly. And unfortunately, I've had my share of these calls in the past months, but this seems to be their general approach, and it seems to be one that works as their go-to formula for trying to solve a problem. So with that, actually, I'll turn it here to Jordan. I had a question for you. As a counselor, a major part of your work centered around listening, obviously. And so could you walk me through an example of how you demonstrated empathy through listening in order to understand what your client is experiencing?
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about this book in particular, chapter 2 talks a lot about being a mirror. And one of the effective strategies that we use a lot in therapy and a lot in counseling, and specifically with my younger kiddos, is reflecting back to them, right? So the first thing that I want to set up, and the first place that I want to start is from an empathetic place and from a calm place, calm body, right? So if I'm walking into a therapy session or walking into a place with my kiddos and I'm ready to hash it out with them, right? They're going to bring it back at me. And I'm going to tell you, if you've ever been in a battle with a 3-year-old, it's not going to work, right? Like I have lost many a times. So setting myself up for success by going in with a neutral attitude helps. Making them feel safe, making them feel valued, reflecting a lot of things back to them. I hear you. That's really hard. I know that you want the red chair. That's not a choice right now. How about the blue chair? Lots of those things used as reflecting and just being in that space with them, validating their emotions. Yeah, I know that that's really hard. Let's try this instead. And a lot of the times too, just sitting with them in that space can be a really good and effective tool and strategy. I think a lot of the times we want to get to the core of things right away and we want to solve a problem right away. But until we can sit in that space with some of that discomfort and some of that maybe frustration or sadness, you're not going to quite get to the core just yet. So I think starting with tone is important, empathizing, reflecting back some of those, and then getting to ideally the solution is a good place to start.
Thank you, that makes sense. And one thing I did pick up on was I was that kid who wanted the red chair and I needed to be talked down, so completely understand.
Red's a nice color, I get it.
I appreciate your insight. Yeah. And actually segueing in, perfectly into this next chapter, which was being a mirror, how you just stated, the main takeaway is to get as much information as possible from the other side in order to inform your decision-making. It's almost impossible to unearth everything necessary to arrive at a decision. And even if we were able to get everything relevant to the situation, we might just drown under the sheer weight of information. So once you're locked in on what you're dealing with and who you're dealing with, attitudes and mannerisms are everything. So matching your counterpart's energy creates a baseline of understanding. So if they're energetic and you're lethargic, you might run into a certain friction over there. Again, if they're speaking in everyday language and you're speaking as if you just came out of some sort of dissertation, there might be a sort of a mismatch as well. I've in keeping with the general TV theme, I've had my fair share of just watching television. My fiance has gotten me into the Bachelor and Bachelorette franchises, and for whatever it's worth, it's interesting TV. However, I've seen this tactic of being a mirror play out perfectly. So the beginning of each season starts with one person, the Bachelor or Bachelorette, on their job. They're looking to extract as much information as possible from the 20 or so contestants in a truncated amount of time to pressure test their compatibility. And watching it play out, so if the contestant's energy is erratic or all over the place, they usually get sent home. But not always, but typically the one who gets that final rose is the one who kind of had the same energy and kind of mirrored with the Bachelor, Bachelorette was kind of giving off in terms of their vibe. So as slide mentions, surprises are bound to exist. So while this is a little bit of an exaggerated version of being a mirror, I thought it was a relatable enough experience where everyone has kind of encountered somewhere along the line. This next chapter is Don't Feel Their Pain, Label It. This chapter kind of further explores validating the counterparty's emotions by not skipping over them, but making a plan to reinforce their emotions, lets them know that you understand where they're coming from. And there was 3 tactics that this was kind of encapsulated in. One was labeling, which is simply just letting the other person know that you acknowledge their emotion by giving a name to it. And that in turn helps them identify that you understand how they feel. The next one was to neutralize the negative and reinforce the positive. So for instance, if you made some sort of boneheaded mistake, the path of least resistance is just to kind of go right at it, right? The fastest and most efficient way of establishing some sort of working relationship after that is to just acknowledge that you kind of made a mistake and diffuse it as quickly as possible. And the last tactic was do an accusation audit. And the most relevant example I thought of that came to mind is kind of when defense lawyers do this by mentioning upfront everything that their client is accused of to kind of take the sting out of it in their opening statement. And it's funny. So when I got to this last part of doing an accusation audit, the first example that came to my mind was reminding me of this movie, 8 Mile with Eminem. There's this last rap battle scene where he literally says everything that his counterpart could literally go at him with. And the counterpart just ends up kind of walking away because he has nothing else to provide in terms of some back and forth rapport. So I have a question for you, Michael. Of these 3 tactics, labeling, neutralizing the negative, and or doing an accusation audit, whether at work or personally, can you give an example of when you have successfully used one of these?
Yeah, I'll lean a little bit more heavily into car sales. Everybody here in one way or another has purchased a vehicle, knew what they wanted, and didn't want to budge on what their budget was. I, as a salesman at the time with the dealership, I would lean heavily on identifying what things were important to them and what things weren't. So by identifying, AKA labeling, I was able to literally neutralize anything that was of not significant importance to them. I have to have a sunroof. Well, okay, let's take a look at this. Well, this has this thing that I don't want, but it has this. Let's lean heavily into what you do like. We can find a common ground at the obstacle instead of me having to hurdle that obstacle, and have them meet me where I'm at, and at the same time engaging with them what their true wants are. So when it comes down to getting down the line and discussing pricing of the vehicle, it's identifying those things that worked for them along the way, and so that you're not with, but you said X, and being talked out of it in the later stages. As long as you are able to identify those things early on and say, hey, but you said these are the things that were of significant importance to you. That way we can kind of get back to a common ground where we had that discussion, we can label that, and we can reinforce what got us to the position to discuss budgets, discuss actually signing on the dotted line. As long as we got to that point, we had that common ground, we can progress further.
Thank you, Michael. And honestly, that kind of leads into this next portion as well, where understanding what it is that your client wants, and then ultimately getting them there and making them think it was their own idea, being able to tease out what was important to them and kind of, carrying them along the way. So this next chapter is be aware of the no and master the yes. This chapter kind of explores the power of no in a negotiation. And no always is the start of a negotiation, not the end of it. And as human beings, we're kind of conditioned for protection in survival mode, meaning we inherently dislike anything that kind of takes us into our uncharted territories or kind of pushes our boundaries. And no is that sort of defense mechanism that allows us to kind of, put up that barrier. So moreover, basically, when someone says no, it seldom means that they've considered all the facts, they've walked through it strategically, and they've arrived at no as an answer, through some sort of rational choice. Typically, it's really just one that's temporary in order to kind of maintain the status quo. So the main takeaway from this chapter is to train yourself to understand no as something other than a rejection and respond accordingly. For example, when I was an undergrad and roaming the malls was a thing, I worked at a cell phone carrier selling cell phones and accessories. And as you can imagine, no was pretty much par for the course with that sort of job. So whether it was me trying to get some sort of initial sell or a cross sell or upsell, we would hear no at various stages along the way. And I would hear phrases such as, I don't think I can afford it, I'm not ready yet to agree, I need more information, etc. So initially, and this was my second sales job, it was easy to become dejected at just accumulating so many no's in a day until I realized that no wasn't the rejection or an assessment of my performance. It was just a defense mechanism that I should anticipate going into this transaction and know how to overcome it. So a tactic that I use and that was highlighted is sort of the art of persuasion. And it really wasn't about how smooth or forceful I was, although I was those two things. But it was about kind of convincing the other party that really what it was that I wanted them to get across was honestly their idea. Going on to this panel discussion right here, and I'll start with you, Jordan. Can you tell me a little bit about how you utilize these tactics in work and in home and beyond?
Yeah, so one of my favorite things to do with kiddos, and especially kids that are coming from backgrounds where they might not have a lot of sense of agency or not a lot of control in their day-to-day, right? And so if they are living in chaotic environments or something in their environment has changed that they don't have control over, a lot of the times they're going to try to find that in other spaces, right? And so if that's, I want the red chair, that's me trying to get that sense of control. And so instead, I'm going to present them with two different options that I know are available to them, right? So instead of the red chair, I'm going to say, well, how about we pick from the blue chair or the green chair, right? And then I'm giving them some sense of control, but really I'm the one making the choice for them. And a lot of the times you'll see that in those spaces, they're a little bit more willing to feel like, oh yeah, I've got the upper hand now. Like I'm about to take that blue chair. I like a blue chair too. I'm gonna take the blue chair. Great, everybody wins, right? My other kiddo gets to keep the red chair, they get the blue chair. And so in those spaces, giving them a little bit of sense of agency and feeling like we're doing this together, this is shared, can be really, really helpful in moving through and getting out of that sort of stuck state. With my husband, a little bit more difficult. I got to use a little bit more oomph to try to get that pasta into my diet 5 days a week. But I think a lot of the times just reflecting those things back or giving choices in a place where like, I already know what I want. I'm going to present you with two other options. Maybe one of those is something that I know you might want too. But at the end of the day, I'm going to get a carb. So that's really what's most important.
Fair enough. And Michael, I'll pose the same question to you as well.
Yeah, I believe ultimately it's establishing a relationship so that you are working in tandem to accomplish a goal, right? Identifying what is working for you and what is working for the person that you're selling to or you're being sold to. If we're just leaning on, like in my marriage, my wife dictates what we're watching on Netflix, not by way of asking me, but putting it on the TV. She knows that I'm going to like it. She leans heavily into the fact like, what your track record shows is that you like shows like this. Why don't you want to watch this one? And that's her way of providing me a space to say, well, maybe I will like it. If it's already on the TV, let's just ride with it. And that is ultimately what you're doing in any sales position, and negotiating overall is just identifying what the relationship is and how you can work in tandem to accomplish a specific goal, whether that be having pasta or if it's watching Netflix or purchasing a vehicle or real estate. It's one of those things that you kind of just have to be comfortable with the person. Establishing something that is like identifying what they don't want to do is just as valuable as identifying what they want to do.
Thanks, Michael and Jordan. As an aside here, I'm jotting down notes. I said I had my fiance, we're getting married here in September. So I'm looking at some of these examples of things that I need to kind of work through in terms of negotiations going forward. So pasta and Netflix. But yeah, anyway, I'll turn it over to Madison to go over to chapter 5.
Yes, pasta and Netflix is basically all you need. That's the marriage hack for you. I can concur with Michael and Jordan's statements on that. Moving to chapters 5 through 7, we are going to explore concepts centering around getting a "that's right" from your counterpart, bending their reality, and creating the illusion of control. In negotiations, Voss highlights that one of the worst things you can hear from the other party is "you're right." This might sound like it's a win, but in truth, this might be used by your counterpart to actually force an end to the conversation. And even more detrimental, this can signal that your counterpart is not actually bought into the approach. Instead, you want to trigger a "that's right." You can get this by using a lot of the techniques we've already mentioned so far, like labeling their feelings. Coupling this with paraphrasing and emotional affirmation, you've ideally defined the world according to your counterpart, triggering a "that's right." At the end of the day, people just want to feel understood. If you're able to summarize how they are feeling and why they are feeling that, a lot of walls will come down. In chapter 6, titled "Bend Their Reality," readers learn the importance of understanding emotional drivers. In negotiations or life in general, people tend to be driven by fear and/or the desire to avoid pain. For example, people will statistically choose scenarios where they lose less money over those where they win more. Another emotional driver is fairness. People want the feeling that everyone is being fair, not just to them, but also that they are being perceived as fair. Notice none of these drivers were about setting and hitting goals. As the negotiator, it's up to you to orient the discussion around the objectives, keeping the emotional drivers in mind. This can be done by reframing bullet points of your offer to directly align with your counterpart's objectives, or persuading the other party that they have something to lose if the deal falls through, such as reputation, time, a great solution to their problem. If you've taken Positive Pricing's masterclass, you've likely also heard about prospect theory, or the theory behind the psychology of choice. When you go to Target to buy razors or shampoo, you might notice a $2.99, $60.99, and $8.99 version of each. The $8.99 option almost entirely exists to make the other two look more reasonable, right? The ending in the 99 cents makes you feel better about the price compared to an even $3, $7, or $9. These are a few examples of prospect theory in action. Other techniques in this arena include establishing ranges, introducing non-monetary terms, and using specific non-rounded numbers to create the signal that you've thought hard about this number, and this creates the precision that alludes to you not being flexible or having that figure up for negotiation. Rounding off this section, we have chapter 7, creating the illusion of control. This chapter is all about putting your counterpart in the driver's seat. As I am sure many of us has experienced and has already been mentioned multiple times today, throughout personal and professional, the most effective way to get someone to buy into your approach or idea, make them think it was theirs. Other ways this approach can help is it allows you to say no without really saying no. In the book, ransom payment negotiations were a common example. A kidnapper wants $5 million by tomorrow, to which the negotiator might respond, "How am I supposed to do that? I'd have to liquidate my house. I'd have to sell all my cars. How can I actually get you $5 million tomorrow?" In our world, in the legal profession, this might be a tight deadline, a fee you don't agree with, salary negotiations, or just a purely unrealistic request. Responding with calibrated questions like those listed here, get your counterpart engaged in helping find you a solution, and usually without them realizing it, you are driving the conversation towards a solution that is actually your preference. Note that none of the example questions start with why. Starting questions in this way tends to put your counterpart in the defensive position, which will not be productive to discussions at hand. Let's turn to our panel now to hear their experiences with these tactics. Mutaba, can you tell us a bit about how you use prospect theory ideas in your player contract negotiations?
Absolutely. So I think if you look at NBA contract negotiations, really in any major sport over the past few decades, they've really kind of developed. So initially, it used to be for your services, I'm going to provide a monetary value, but with implementations such as the salary cap and luxury tax, small market teams are now on the same playing field as larger market teams. So it's no longer I can offer you more money because the league puts a limit on that. So we've had to get really creative with that. So in terms of free agent negotiations, what we lean on heavily is being in Silicon Valley. So one example is one of our players, Damian Lee. We signed him to a 3-year deal last year. He grew up a huge PlayStation fan. Kind of one thing that we had for us was not only is PlayStation's headquarters 15 minutes away from our offices in Arena, PlayStation is also one of the founding partners of our new arena. And so we were able to get him a partnership with PlayStation where they help out his foundation. He visits their headquarters probably every other month just to go and play the old PlayStations. So we leverage stuff like that, but then also I think you've seen players like LeBron James really hinge on this idea of being more than an athlete. So players are involved in these venture capital meetings. A lot of our season ticket holders are big players in the VC market. And so players are rubbing elbows with them, talking to them almost as much as they talk to the coaches. So I think from our perspective, that's the one thing that we really lean on in selling this idea that not only will you be a successful NBA player, make a lot of basketball money by signing with us, but you also have an opportunity to think about your post-career days as well.
Great. So it sounds like part of that too is the requirement of doing the research in order to kind of understand what else you can provide in addition to the funds.
Absolutely. Every player is different. So like I mentioned with the case with Damian, he was a younger player, so his mind wasn't really focused on tech investing, but we knew that he loved PlayStation. We knew that his brother-in-law, Stephen Curry, was on the team, so we were able to leverage that to our advantage as well. And then you have other younger guys such as, or older guys, sorry, such as Kent Bazemore. Kent started with us as a rookie and started with Stephen Curry. So him and Steph are really good friends. So we were able to leverage Steph, where we had Steph actually in the meetings with us when we were recruiting Kent. And so I think every player is different. You kind of see what their biggest interests are. Some guys are hesitant about coming across the country and leaving their families, but they've always wanted to live in California. So we tap in with coaches from college or high school or personal friends that we may know or agents. My boss and our general manager, Bob Myers, was an agent for 25 years. So thankfully his network is really expansive. And so every player is different. It's a lot of due diligence from our end.
Great, thank you. Jordan, want to tell us a little bit more about how you've used some of these tactics?
Yeah, so I think there's this resounding theme again, getting on the same page. And so one of the things that I pulled from chapter 7 is this idea about regulating your emotions if you want any hope of coming out on top or any hope of being successful. And so again, if I am being matched, if I'm matching someone else's dysregulation, or both going through, or we're both upset or both angry, none of us are going to come out on top or come out successful. And so needing to regulate myself before going into those conversations. And then the other concept of no being, nobody wants to hear no. If I hear no, that to me resonates as try harder or push harder, right? And so if I come to one of my kiddos in a dysregulated state and I'm just like, no, that's not an option, and I'm not giving anything else back, we're just running up against brick walls constantly together. And so providing that illusion of control and giving some other options. So how about we try this? Or what about this instead? Or, why, or what is it about the red chair? Or trying to get, again, a little bit more information as best as I can. It's obviously, some of the kids that we work with are in some spaces, if you don't have the ability to communicate effectively with a 2-year-old, I think a lot of the times as a parent, you want to be the adult, right? You want to make that choice. But providing kids with, again, some agency and some illusion of control that they are making a choice in these situations is going to be better than getting into a power struggle with your child, whether that's at a grocery store or in school or with my husband at a restaurant, so on and so forth. So
great. So it sounds like a lot of calibrated questions instead of no's. And I think a lot of your mirroring and labeling comments kind of speak a lot to the "that's right" concept. You don't necessarily want to hear as their counselor that you are right. You want them to feel like you've identified their emotions enough that you understand them.
exactly. And I think you can do a lot of that too with with rephrasing even. And so when someone said something to you, I can reflect that back or rephrase that in a way to try to get more information or get to the core of what else they're looking for. So if someone comes to me and says, hey, I'm really just having a hard time with XYZ, I'm going to repeat that back and say, yeah, I'm hearing you say that this is something that's been difficult for you. And they're going to keep on keeping on, right? And I'll be really honest, if you're paying a therapist, a lot of what we're doing is we're just rephrasing exactly what you said so that you just keep telling us more. So I'm sorry. But that really gets people to dig a little bit deeper and come up with a few more emotions or identifiable pieces that they might not have had otherwise. And my job as a counselor is to just keep pulling out those small pieces and those small nuggets over time through rephrasing and labeling and mirroring.
Great. And I can say being in therapy while reading this book was also very interesting because I was knowing all of the tactics being used on me, but also knowing it was for my benefit was very a mind scramble. So that was interesting for sure. All right, we'll move to the next set of chapters.
Right. Thank you guys, Jordan and Musaba, for your perspectives. So this next chapter, chapter 8, is guaranteeing execution. So this chapter explores the concept of execution. So meaning yes is nothing without the how. So while an agreement is nice, contract is better, money in the door or a signed check is ultimately the best. So in a negotiation, people tend to focus on just getting the yes. And while it's great, it's only the first hurdle in the race. So it's important to calibrate how questions as a means to kind of keep the negotiations going. This enables the other party to kind of put pressure on the counterparty to come up with answers, contemplate problems, and thereby providing their own solutions and empowering themselves. So that the art of closing a deal is just making sure that we're focused until the very end. So there are a few rules to be cognizant of as you are kind of encountering or embarking upon this execution phase. The first one being the 7, 38, and 55% rules. Really, it's just noticing someone's tone of voice, their body language, and making sure that what they're saying aligns with what they are actually giving across. And making sure what, that the meaning of their saying is actually, again, what they're giving across. The next one would be the rule of 3, which is simply just getting the other person to agree to the same thing 3 times in the conversation. By creating that track record of the yes, it kind of, alleviates any sort of the initial resistance, and it kind of makes it the yes flowing throughout the conversation. And the last one would be the line cues or the Pinocchio effect. So essentially, liars tend to speak in more complex sentences in order to win over their suspicious counterparts. On average, they use way more words than truth tellers, and they use far more third-person pronouns to kind of create that sort of a schism or that rift in between themselves and the actual lie, putting distance. For example, we've all had a friend who has spoken about that hypothetical third person, and as you kind of get to the end of their whatever they're talking about, you realize that honestly they're just kind of talking about themselves. So I have a question for you, Mutava. As you stated, a part of your job is of assisting players on their off-the-court endeavors, making sure that they're able to kind of find the right partner to brand with or the tech ventures to invest in. Do you have an example of how you were able to take the first hurdle, which was the yes, and walk it all the way through the execution for some of their on the court or off the court endeavors?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's the whole process is really a journey. I think a lot of NBA players can really get access to a lot of different deal flow in different industries. And so I think step number 1 is talking with the guys and seeing what they want to get into. So a good example to answer that question, I think I go back to last season, we had D'Angelo Russell. We had traded for him. He was 23-year-old, fresh off of his first All-Star appearance, and was working on his new shoe deal. And I go back to PlayStation again because found out he was a big gamer. He would bring his PlayStation with him all the time on the road, and and he had, reached out to me and was like, hey, Mutaba, the new PlayStation 5 drops next year. Can I get it? And I was like, you can get that and some more. You're an NBA All-Star. And so we were able to work out a deal where they assisted him with his foundation. So they would not only donate monetary value, but they would also provide product. There was one time he did a hospital visit at a local Kaiser and really connected with these two young boys. And he was able to get PlayStation to send them care packages. And PlayStation, to their credit, has been a great partner. They help out. And it benefits both ways, because when they have their town halls, they just had recently had a Black History Month one, and they were able to get Damian Lee as well as D'Angelo speak on it. And so just finding those, taking that initial yes and then laying out the different factors that not only benefit D'Angelo but also benefited the team, I think was able to work with us. PlayStation, to their credit, was just really easy to work with. And there was a genuine passion from D'Angelo. He didn't just see it as monetary gain. It was an opportunity to work with a brand and a company that he identified and loved since he was a young child.
Thanks, Mutaba. Well, I hung up my sneakers here a while ago, but if PlayStation is kind of looking for anybody else, just keep me in mind. This next chapter here is called Bargaining Hard. So basically, after you've gone through the first couple chapters, all the psychologically nuanced stuff, the labeling, the mirroring, calibrating, etc., you really have to get down to brass tacks, right? So top negotiators, know that conflict is often the greatest path to, is often the path, to the greatest deals. And the best way is to kind of have fun and engaging in this sort of conflict. So identifying your counterparty's negotiation style, whether they're an accommodator or they're being assertive or an analyst, you'll figure out then the easiest way to kind of approach them. So most mornings I take a 3-mile walk / run towards the Capitol here in Northeast DC. One of my favorite podcasters to listen to is Dave Ramsey. So for whatever your take on his views may be, his negotiation style is the perfect example. It's kind of just getting down to brass tacks. So a caller will call in and they'll call in with, their specific, problem they're trying to overcome. And he'll just get down to the nitty gritty, just in terms of his formula, in terms of his just common sense style of, trying to help them avoid debt or trying to help them overcome a specific hurdle. And it's always just that common sense with love sort of approach. He'll get past all the different things that make a caller feel like they're different and really just get down to a proven path in order to kind of, alleviate their problems. And so one of his favorite quotes that I've always heard is, to be unclear is to be unkind, right? So when you're entering into some sort of negotiation, transparency is key. And it's imperative to have clarity on the sort of boundaries that you're going to set up in terms of, what you're going to go in with in a specific negotiation. So preparation is everything in that regard. So that way, when the pressure is on and you're kind of in the throes of the negotiation, you already understand where your bottom line is going to be. You're not having to make it up on the fly, and you kind of then default to your highest level of preparation in that regard. So in that sort of negotiation, you go in with a legitimate goal. You go in, you've done the labeling, the calibrating, et cetera, and you make sure that you kind of are able to map out what the responses will be in that specific sort of negotiation. But then, as I said, you default to your highest level of preparation, and that way you already understand the potential outcome that you want to arrive at far in advance of going into this negotiation. So in tandem with that, just ensuring that emotion doesn't necessarily play into that sort of negotiation as well. Making sure that you're calm, you're focused, and you're synced in what it is that you're trying to elicit from the other side. Making sure that you understand it's a sparring match, right? So there's your counterparty throws a punch, you throw one back, and always keeping in mind that the other person across from you isn't necessarily a problem, but the situation is. And then lastly, preparing some sort of Agyeman model. So basically, prior to getting into the weeds of a negotiation, having extreme anchor, as I mentioned earlier, and have well-calibrated and well-defined questions and offers, Remembering there's a 65%, 85%, 95%, 100% rule. Going in at your initial offer, 65% of your target price, and then going up in increments allows the other counterparty to feel like they're kind of, beating you down as a submission. And then, throwing in some non-round numbers makes it feel like you actually put some sort of algebraic equation into what it is that you're trying to get to. But really, ultimately, and is the general theme throughout this, is you get to a solution, letting the other counterparty think that it was their idea when all along it was what you wanted to get into. And really, in every transaction, each party should go into it feeling and leave it feeling that they were better off than when they arrived into it. And then lastly, this last chapter is called Finding the Black Swan. So this chapter focuses on the unknowns in negotiations, right? So meaning that whatever you don't know can potentially has the power to kill any deal. And so the key is to uncover those unknowns and to leverage them to your advantage in order to bring about a successful transaction. So finding those black swans or those powerful unknowns is intrinsically difficult. But truly the reason why it's difficult is because people don't really know what the right questions are to ask. So some techniques for finding this black swan and exploiting them are remembering that your counterpart might not even know what information is relevant or important to so specific transaction. So, and thusly, they aren't able to reveal it. So, prodding and probing and trying to tease out what's important is imperative in order to assess, whether this information is relevant enough and how you can kind of make it malleable in terms of how you want to deploy it later on in the transaction. And then ultimately remaining flexible and adaptable in any situation as well will allow you to not be so rigid and strict in terms of how you want to get to it, but having that free flow of exchange of information allows for a better overall transaction. And then ultimately leveraging, once you're able to tease out the information, leveraging these black swans and deploying them at strategic places along the transaction allows you to arrive at a solution that is, leaves each party better off than when you got in there. And then outside of these kind of hard and fast rules that the novel talks about, really employing worldviews or really understanding specifically what it is that can kind of create that human interaction in a transaction, right? So whether you are having a discussion with somebody and they mention, oh, I'm from I'm from the Bay Area, and bringing up some sort of icebreaker, oh, how go Warriors, or maybe referencing somebody that's famous from the spot, brings that worldviews type of element into it, such that it's not just about the nitty gritty of the specific transaction, but each party is able to understand that across the table from them is just a human being, right? And that ultimately allows for the greatest arrival at the best solution for both sides. So with that I'll go into these next questions for our panel. And I'll start with you, Michael. Do you have an example of when you were able to get to what we call getting the fake yes, right? Which is somebody gives you a yes at the onset and everything seems, kind of hunky-dory, and then you realize later on down the line that you kind of got burned by that. Do you have an example of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Working in real estate, it's more often than not that there's a proxy that's sent over to the location to survey the space, and I'm trying to sell a product and an experience that the decision maker isn't there. I could get to a point in negotiation where I ask them, like, are you guys ready to make the move? Like, cut and dry, making it well known that I'm asking for that sale, giving the advantage back to me. And they're like, yeah, we love it, but the decision maker isn't here. They ultimately call the shots. I got the yes from this person, but if I didn't do my diligence at the very beginning in the interview and labeling all of these things, is there anything that would keep you from signing here? Is there anything that would prevent you from being a part of the experience or a part of the community here? When I get that fake yes and they pawn it off on somebody else, that's when you have to go back and understand like the dynamics of what the relationships are. Like, oh, I apologize. Like, I must have misunderstood who the decision maker was here. Giving myself the opportunity to say, hey, can we meet up with the person that is the decision maker? I would love to schedule out a time that we can actually get this person in place on site so that they can experience what I'm showing you. You seem like you really love it and you've labeled off all of the things that are really important to you and the decision maker and ultimately your team. I would love to have everybody come in, do a trial day, or could just come in and experience the space so that I can get a firm yes and speak to the correct people. more often than not, that fake yes is coming from somebody that isn't ultimately a decision maker or doesn't feel comfortable with you. And to that second point there, if they're not feeling comfortable with you, you can ultimately ask them, like, is there something that I missed here? Is there something that we can go over again to make you feel more comfortable? Is it me? Is there something in particular about the space that you're not vibing with? Ultimately, getting to a place where we are both sitting across from each other, like you said, as humans, and understanding where we're actually at. So it's not so cut and dry, like I'm selling, you're buying, or I'm trying to get you to buy. Understanding like there are hurdles that are in place that, again, we have to come together and try to figure out what that is by getting to what the real yes is.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And I have a question here for the both of you, but I'll start with Mutaba. How have you felt that the virtual world, in this era of COVID, has impacted or changed your negotiation styles?
Yeah, so I think it's had both a positive and negative effect. So I'll start with the negative at first. Typically, courting free agents is a whole process, and I think there's like a personal attachment to it. We'll typically fly out a free agent, fly him or his family out, as well as their agent, take them out to dinner, take them around the practice facility. They'll kind of get to see the facility, the arena, sit down with us, spend a few days, and hopefully sign them to a contract before they leave. This year, it was all phone calls, and it wasn't even directly to the players. It was really with agents. So we had to kind of really lean on our championship pedigree as well as our coaching staff and playing with the Steph Currys and the Klay Thompson. But you lose that personable touch. You lose that kind of the first allure of walking into the facility and seeing all the championship banners and seeing the new state-of-the-art equipment. And so I think from that standpoint, it's been negative, as well as the draft process. The draft process was all through Zoom or Ring Central for us. And so we weren't able to do a scouting combine. We weren't able to get fly the players in for in-person workouts. So it kind of left a lot of room for error from our end in terms of not being able to see these guys in person. And the player that we drafted, James Wiseman, only played 3 collegiate games. So we really took a big risk with taking him. But I think kind of from the positive standpoint, we have our front office is all over the country. We have a couple of scouts on the East Coast. So with Zoom, we were able to just having that ability to talk with them more rather than waiting for them to come out here. And then also, I think we were able to leverage our players a lot more. Typically, our players during the off season are just back home to whatever states they live. But this time when we were negotiating with agents or players, we were able to have our players hop on and speak to the fact. And so I think it's looking at it kind of from a positive lens and a negative lens. It's definitely been an effect on both ends.
That's great. And Michael, for you, how has it changed in the era of COVID?
Yeah, working essentially in real estate has changed it tremendously. We have to take into consideration people's health and safety. What things are we implementing to make sure that people feel comfortable coming to our space and overall having an experience. As many of us here have probably wanted to buy a home, a new apartment, or if you are looking into an office space, it's how are you going to feel there? You're going to spend X amount of time there. For that to become a virtual aspect and bank on the fact of like, how am I going to actually have an experience? I think what has really hindered the industry as a whole is like not knowing what you're getting into unless you're physically somewhere. By taking out that key aspect, you are honestly just hinging on a whim where you don't know, but it's your job as a person that is negotiating or trying to sell that product to highlight the aspects of like how we are assuring them in their health and safety, providing them with an experience that's like, hey, come in and experience our space for a month. If you don't like it, that's something that we can discuss at a later date, but you're not going to know until you're actually on site. The way that the world has changed overall, it's like, it's no longer just highlighting your specific position. You are highlighting the community, what businesses are open around you, getting in touch with your community and understanding what the overall market is like. That's changed so much that trying to keep up with that on a daily or even hourly basis is a job in itself. So being aware of all of those things, I think that where we're heading, it has to work in a sense that virtual is like, if I have to take my laptop and show you exactly what's going on around the space and walk with you, we're providing those opportunities. I think it's just being a hybrid at this point in time, especially in my industry, is just understanding what the client's wants or needs are and adapting to that.
It makes sense. Well, with that, we will close out. Thank you guys, once again for just all your efforts on this as well. And I will turn over to Madison to answer a question here.
Yes, I was just going to field some of the questions in the Q&A. So there was a question about if your counterpart kind of also knows these tactics, how would you kind of go about that? And I know the book illustrated a few examples of essentially these are still usable and that might actually help you get to a solution faster. And I also mentioned personally going through therapy while I know all of the tactics that are going to be used on me. And part of it was just my own decision to participate in the process, but I wanted to pick Jordan's brain on this too, maybe even thinking about your husband knows what you are trained to do, kind of knows when you're trying to use these tactics on him. I thought that'd be a fun example if you want to share.
Yeah, and he knows my tricks pretty well, but he knows they're backed by something, right? I'm not walking into a discussion or a conversation with him with this false sense of I know what I'm, with a false sense of what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. I have 8.5, 10 years, whatever worth of experience in counseling and that education and that background. That means something, and so even when he gets frustrated or even when he knows I'm pulling out my psychotherapy tricks, he knows they're for good reason, right? And I think that's really what's important, is that the book uses knowledge and experience, and I'm using my knowledge and experiences as a therapist to get to the core of something, right? I'm not, I think there are certainly times where he and I, probably just me, where I will maybe try to use them to my advantage more than anything, but they're backed by something. So I think that there's something that means something.
Great. And I know in the kind of pricing worlds in client and law firm side, I was kind of coached a lot of the time that sometimes people just expect negotiation. I think even if people know the tactics each party is going to use, sometimes people just need the negotiation to feel like they got a good deal, whether it be at a street market or in pricing arrangements or with your spouse. I think sometimes people just kind of expect that dynamic as well. So thank you.
All right, I know we're running up here with 2 more minutes. So I did want to make one mention, which is a special shout out to Tom and the Iridium team. They will be raffling off 5 copies of this book, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. And additionally, to keep an eye out on the survey after this as well for any feedback would be greatly appreciated. So with that, I think we may have, time to field one more question. Was there any more questions, Madison?
There was not, but if any panelists had some last final comments as they listen to others, you're welcome to share as well.
Oh. All right, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it, y'all.
All right.